Northern Rot. Written and recorded by Spife in the year 2023. Chapter 1. The Birchwood Chapel. The cool autumnal wind danced through the leaves of the tall trees in the greensward, their shade providing much alleviation from the beating rays of the sun. Though it was midway into autumn, it had been a hot summer. Quaint as the grandwoods are, the forest floor was bustling with commotion, the sounds of Fyeling kind echoing off the trees, wagon wheels creaking as they passed along soft forest roads, coated in pine needles, young Fyelings squealing with glee in a game of rummering, dashing along side paths next to houses. A bell chimes from a building made from a large birch tree at the heart of the town, and a small squirrel Fyeling makes his way towards the chapel, walking with determination in each step of his fur-covered feet. The town of Nettle Grove was called this because of the vast amount of nettle growing about the outskirts of town, the banners that fly from the building being decorated with fabrics of green and yellow, and a nettle plant sewn into the center of the design. The town was located in the southern part of the greensward, still deep enough to avoid the lands of humans, but in close proximity to the elves of Midwood, as it was called in the common tongue. The bell of the Birchwood Chapel let out its 12th cry as the squirrel Fyeling entered into the building. Smells of incense swept away the crisp fragrance of autumn when he had entered, and the sounds of low-hummed hymns of sanctity swelled into his ears. The walls of this chapel were made from the inside of the massive birch tree that was hollowed out to form it. The wood was as smooth as silk. In the center of the chapel was an altar to the elven goddess of nature and creation, Yimsalfa, for whom the Fyelings all accredited as their maker. The squirrelkin made his way to the altar, kneeling in front of it and bowing his head in prayer. The smells and sound in here present a hallowed environment to pray in, he thought, as he began to pray. The chaplain, an older monkkin fellow, with a rather stout belly, looked up from his reading in the back nook of the chapel, and stood, waddling over to greet the squirrelkin.
"Welcome, my child. Welcome. Might I pray with you?"
The monkkin greets the squirrel with a soft paw on his shoulder. "Aye, you may," the squirrelkin said back in a calm tone.
"Might I ask what you are praying for?"
the chaplain asked as he kneeled down beside the squirrelkin, leaning hard on his shoulder as he did so.
"I am to go to war. As King Samuel commands us to defend, we must defend. I am to go north to fight the scourging rot, and now I come to ask for Yimsalfa's blessing."
The chaplain takes a deep breath in hearing these words.
"Threefold of thanks to you, child. Your duty will serve to save us. This I know, we are all but children of Yimsalfa, and her blessing shall flow. What is your name, child?"
"Qwingan. And yours?"
"I am Saltho."
And with that, the two prayed. Chapter 2. Qwingan. Qwingan is a young Fyeling, 7 years of age, which is around 20 in the age of humans. His fur, a soft amber-brown in color, with white trails running down the sides of his body, rustled in the wind, now back outside of the chapel. He dug into the pouch tied around his cloak and retrieved a small gourd bottle, uncorking it and taking a drink. Returning the gourd back to his pouch, he raised one hand to blot out the patches of sunlight that still streamed through the trees. Scanning the edge of the town, his eyes settled on something in the distance. Dropping his hand back to his side, he began walking in the direction that he was staring. The streets of the town were now more calm, with the sound of metalwork coming from the right, and the smells of bread being baked to the left behind him now. The pine needles carpeting the floor through the town made the walking pleasant, almost spongy under feet. Qwingan was headed towards the northern edge of Nettle Grove. He pulled at the neck of his tunic, feeling it to be tight now. The tunic was decked under feet. Qwingan was headed towards the northern edge of Nettlegrove. He pulled at the neck of his tunic, feeling it to be tight now. The tunic was decorated with a shield split into 4 blocks, with the royal sigils in them. A pair on the bottom left block, a fallen maple leaf to the right. Above the leaf, a paw print, and to the left of that, a patch of mushrooms. This was the standard tunic worn by the knights of the royal court, though Qwingan was only a squire. He and all the other Fyeling kin had been called to arms, for a threat now loomed in the northern parts of the Grand Woods. Those parts of the Grand Woods were close to the taint left by the orcs during the fabled birthing pains of the world, and that taint had been rumoured to begin infecting the Grandswood with a strange form of rot. The rot not only affected the plants and the trees, but the creatures that lived there as well. King Samuel had called every capable Fyeling in service to the front of the northernmost city in the Fyeling territory, Willow's Rest. Qwingan had grown up in Nettlegrove, and this would be his first time going so far from his home. At King Samuel's coronation he was there, and was met by King Samuel face to face. It was from that day that Qwingan decided that he would become a knight of the royal court. But first, he must have to start somewhere, and a squire to a knight is where it begins. The knight that Qwingan was serving as squire to was a middle-aged rabbitkin named Dolben, whose heathered grey fur was streaked with white where battle scars were. Qwingan was going to meet Dolben at the edge of Nettlegrove for something important, but what exactly he was told not. As he rounded the corner of one of the last houses on the outskirts of town, he saw Dolben waiting at the edge of the forest.
"Come along, lad. You've not to keep them waiting," said Dolben, starting off on a less than well-travelled path into the surrounding green.
"Who's they?" Qwingan asked, quickening his pace to keep up with the rabbitkin, who was strikingly quick despite his age. Dolben just raised a gloved paw to his mouth in a hushing motion, as if to say, "You'll see, lad." Qwingan had known Dolben for a long time, with Dolben being a close friend to his father. When Qwingan's father was slain in a war of attrition after King Samuel came into power, Dolben came back to Nettlegrove in order to take Qwingan as his squire when he became of age. Qwingan let out a huff and put speed into his step as the two of them went down the forest path. Chapter 3. Flail in the Woods. The part of the woods that Dolben was leading them into was somewhere that Qwingan had never ventured. Qwingan remained silent as they walked, paying attention to the quiet that Dolben was assuming himself. The undergrowth grew thick here, crowding into the path that they were walking on, barely a path itself. Ahead a short distance, Qwingan noticed something constructed out of wood, almost like an altar of some sort. How curious of a thing to be out here, he thought to himself. Soon they came upon the wooden thing, and it became more clear. It was an altar of sorts, with intricate carvings into the base of the altar showing a tree with a face in it. "What is this place?" Qwingan asked Dolben as he looked around the woods.
"It is a meeting place, and now we are to wait for the ones that we are meeting. This is something that your father had set apart for you when the time was right, and I believe that this time is now."
This perked up Qwingan's ears. Something from his father, he thought. His heart beat fast with excitement. Dolben sat down on a large rock, his armor clanking as he situated himself. "Who are we to meet?" Qwingan asked excitedly.
"As curious as ever," Dolben said with a chuckle. "But sometimes curiosity is best satisfied by the experience."
Dolben motioned for Qwingan to sit down beside him, and so he did, deciding to drink in the sounds of the woods. There were birds chirping all about. A raven's call from deep in the woods was answered by another one from a different direction. The sounds of mockingbirds and whippoorwills and green sky pearls all seasoned the forest lively. Qwingan adored bird songs, for some older Fyelings still had the gift to understand bird speech, which was claimed to hold some of the secrets of life. The wind was dancing through the leaves as well, making a symphony of rustling and lush sounds. The rustling leaves reminded him of the story of the elves he had grown up hearing, He had seldom seen elves, though they lived in the same grandwoods. It was then that he heard a new sound, a creaking and cracking sound as though a tree was starting to fall.
"Sound as though they've come,"
said Dolben, standing from the rock and walking to the altar. Qwingan stood and followed, his fur bristling at the thought of what might be moving the trees, for the trees were moving in the distance. One tree seemed to be closer than before, and then that tree lifted from the ground and moved even closer. Following the tree up, he noticed a face in the bark, closed eyes, and a slight smile across its mouth. Qwingan's mouth dropped, but he did not make a sound as the thing moved in closer, kneeling down next to the altar.
"This is the keeper of the Granswood. They rarely speak, but they hear everything that happens in this wood, and are amazing craftsmen. Your father had asked something to be made for you, knowing that you'd most likely have it taken to be a knight. The seedling sprouts close," Dolben said with a chuckle, and then turned to face the keeper, bowing onto one knee. Qwingan did the same, still in shock of what they were whispering. What wonders lie in this grandwood, Qwingan thought. The tree bade them rise with a gesture of what Qwingan assumed to be a hand, and so rise they did. The tree then reached out a branch from its twisted body, knotted and gnarled as that of a tree, but still resembling that of a body, and placed something onto the altar. Once the branch retracted, Qwingan saw what it left. A handle of wonderfully carved wood led to a chain of thorny vines, and at the end of the chain was a spiked ball of a large sweet gum fruit. Qwingan's eyes widened at the weapon in front of him. "Well, go ahead and take it,"
said Dolben, giving Qwingan a nudge in the ribs with his elbow. Qwingan reached out and retrieved the flail from the altar, careful not to get pricked by the thorns. It was a sturdy weapon, made with masterful craft. Qwingan bowed again to the creature. "Many thanks to you. This gift shall be used for good," said Qwingan to the keeper. The keeper nodded its head and turned to leave. As it was leaving, Qwingan noticed another face on its back. Eyes closed and smile across its lips, same as the first one, except the features on this face were different. Two faces. That must be why Dolben referred to them as they, thought Qwingan, rising back to his feet.
"Time to go now, lad. The king awaits us,"
Dolben said as they turned to go back the way they came. Qwingan gave one last look to the keeper, and then down at the flail. Closing his eyes, he whispered a thanks to his father, before scurrying to catch up with the Dolben. Chapter 4. Tree-bound Squirrels. It had been 3 days of travel to get to Willow's Rest from Nettle Grove. Being a squirrelkin, Qwingan would have preferred to travel by the trees, but since Dolben could not climb like a squirrel, they traveled by walking. Now on the outskirts of Willow's Rest, the trees started to turn from coniferous to that of willows, from which the town was so aptly named. As they were walking, Qwingan noticed eyes in the trees, not angry ones filled with malice, but eyes looking with curiosity and hope. Groups of squirrelkin came running to meet them, singing and dancing songs of welcome to the two travelers. There were many houses built in the trees for the squirrelkin, and many houses and other buildings on the ground. This was Willow's Rest, and its people, the most of whom were squirrelkin, it seemed.
"Look there, lad. That is where we're heading,"
Dolben said as he pointed to a taller building, built of stone and displaying the king's royal flags.
"That there is the stronghold where the king has set up court to discuss business. We must make haste, before we're too late."
Dolben quickened his pace and made for the stronghold, with Qwingan following, breaking away from the crowd now gathered in their welcoming. After a short trek through the town, they found the gate into the stronghold with two guards, stout mousekin in their helmets and arms, clutching their halberds. They recognized Dolben and let the two of them through without any trouble. Inside, the halls were lit by small candles resting in elegant sconces made from braided willow branches. Carpets of woven pine needles draped the floor, intricate in their designs, with flowers and branches twisting together in their woven artistry. A fancy version of the streets of Nettlegrove, thought Qwingan, as he and Dolben made their way into the courts, where King Samuel would be holding his meetings. Other knights and squires were walking in the same direction as them, seeming that this was the day that they were all meant to finish arriving. The stronghold was bustling with Fyelings hauling boxes of supplies around. Weapons were being stockpiled and potions brewed by Fyeling alchemists in the private rooms of the stronghold. Another 2 guards stood at the doors to the court, but they also recognized Dolben and allowed them through without issue. As the doors to the court creaked open, they were greeted to a great number of knights in their armor. There were mousekin, squirrelkin, rabbitkin, and many others huddled around a large table in the center of the room. A few foxkin were seated towards the back of the room, larger than most of the other Fyelings. The discussion was loud, and many were pointing at a map on the table, pointing out positions for tactical advantage, planning strategies, and general discussion of what to do. Dolben led the way to the table, with Qwingan close beside him. Scanning the faces at the table, his eyes settled on a figure facing away from him, a golden crown resting atop his head. Chapter 5. Face to Face. Dolben made his way to the table, finding a place between 2 mousekin, and greeting them with a hearty slap on the shoulders.
"Hails, my brothers," he said.
The table all welcomed him and sucked him into the conversation. Qwingan found a spot at the table close to Dolben, and observed the goings-on. There was a large map of the Fyeling territories in the Grandswood, and all of the men were pointing to a specific black patch in the north above Willow's Rest.
"They're closing in on us, my king. The rot creeps closer and closer,"
one of the Fylings said sternly. The others mumbled in agreement.
"If we fortify everything here in Willow's Rest, that leaves other towns in the wake. Whether we think we can call it here at once or not, it's better to be safe than sorry," another shouted. Temperaments ran hot as the threat of the rot closed in around them. A silence grew around the table as King Samuel raised a paw. Qwingan looked at him wistfully. The king's damaged limb hung at his side, a nub just below the bending point. A scar on his left eye made the silver-blue fur thin around that eye. His golden crown caught the light of the candles, making it glow ever so slightly. "My men, we must remain calm as we think. Hot heads may lead to hasty actions, and we cannot afford to be hasty in folly." The king adjusted himself at the table. "Sir Mlimley has a strong point," the king said as he pointed to the Rabbit King. "If we were to pull everyone here, we shall surely expose ourselves to other forms of attack. The main focus should be evacuating everyone who cannot fight to the capital. I have come here to provide that strength and support to all kin. We must make sure that they all have time to evacuate." The king turned to Dolben as he finished saying this, and then said to him, "Dolben, come with me." "Yes, my king,"
he replied, and turning with the king, and walking towards a door on the other side of the room. Qwingan followed the 2 of them, coming up alongside Dolben. "Who is this young one?" asked King Samuel in a kind way.
"This is my squire, Qwingan, son of Harfel."
The king stopped in his walk to face Qwingan, looking at him in the eyes. Yes. I should have known. You of your father's patterns, young Qwingan." "Welcome," the king said, returning to his walk, the sound of his cane clicking on the stone floors. "Look, Sir Dolben," the king said as he swung open the doors. Outside was a balcony, looking out to the edge of the town. The rot has spread so close. Thorns and briars have come to choke up this town. Dolben looked out, and so did Qwingan. The usual foliage that sprouted at the edge of the town was replaced by masses of thorns and briars, leaving almost nowhere to walk comfortably.
"In Yimsalfar's name, this is dreadful. What shall we do, my king?"
asked Dolben.
Pause, leaning on the railing around the balcony.
As the king and Dolben carried on talking, Qwingan noticed a shift in the trees beyond the rot. It looked as though something was creeping among those branches. The thought made Qwingan's fur stand on end. He almost shook off the feeling when he saw it. There, in the tree branches, hidden by leaves, was a glint of steel flashing out from the tree line.
Get down!
Qwingan yelled as he tackled the other two to the ground. It was just in the nick of time, for a hard thunk sound slammed into the door behind them all. There, still shaking from the impact, was a spear thrown from somewhere in the trees. The sound of Fyeling's rushing to the door could be heard from inside the stronghold, but not before a figure came and leaped down from the trees, landing below the balcony. A black squirrelkin stood there, covered in scars and armor of strange leather and metals. A rigid helmet rested atop his head.
"O great king, I come to speak."
The black squirrelkin's voice dripped with sarcasm and vehemence.
"More than talk you've done,"
Spat back Dolben, still ducking on the ground. King Samuel slowly stood from the ground and met the black squirrelkin's burning gaze.
"What have you to say, Darkoak Brier?" the king said through gritted teeth.
Chapter 6. Darkoak Brier. The black squirrelkin grinned a nasty smile from below.
"I've come to challenge your crown. You seek to dispose of the rot, but that is weak. I have allied myself with the rot, and with it I am stronger than you'd ever hope to be. Look in the trees."
The squirrelkin spun around, arms outstretched pointing to the trees, now occupied by a multitude of mangy creatures with bows and spears in hand.
"You are outnumbered and vulnerable.
And there's still civilians in town."
The black squirrelkin turned to the army of creatures behind him, rousing them into a cheer of vicious nature. Turning back to the three Fyelings on the balcony, he halts the cry with a sharp movement of his paws and addresses the king once more.
"I give you two options, Samuel. Either you surrender your crown to me, or meet me and my kin in battle."
The squirrelkin's voice trailed off into a growl. By this time, Fyelings with shields and bows and arrows nocked came out to cover King Samuel, Dolben, and Qwingan, guarding them from any shots that the creatures in the trees might take.
"You're full of cowardice, Brier. I'd rather meet you on the field of death than give you what you ask for so easily,"
King Samuel said, gripping his cane tightly.
"So be it. Kin! Attack!"
Darkoak Brier screamed to the army in the trees, from which they promptly began loosing their arrows. Hurrying back into the stronghold, the Fyelings began firing back until everyone was safe inside. Chapter 7. Battle in the Thorns.
"Sir Trant,"
yelled the king as he entered back into the building. An older mousekin knight came running over in response to the king's call.
"Yes, my king."
"Bring me my armor and my weapon."
"Sir Limley, call all kin to evacuate the townfolk. Lady and children kin first."
Sir Trant and Sir Limley ran off to do as they were commanded.
"All kin at arms! We are under attack!"
King Samuel shouted. The sounds of horn blew, and the town of Willow's Rest became a battlefield. After donning armor, King Samuel organized a force of kin to march and meet Darkoak Brier in the field of thorns. Among them was Dolben and Qwingan. The battle had already been raging for 20 minutes when the main army of King Samuel arrived to the battlefield. Slain Fyelings from both sides were laying scattered across the forest floor. King Samuel walked at the front of his army, with a shield attached to his missing limb and a sword in his other paw. A row of Fyelings carrying shields marched along behind Samuel, blocking the rain of arrows from the main force. Ahead stood Darkoak Brier, awaiting Samuel in battle. It was then that the battle fully started. King Samuel charged to meet Darkoak Brier, swinging swords at each other with intent to kill. The other Fyelings joined the battle, clashing against the other side. Sir Trant, with his warhammer, caved in the chestplate of a mangy ratkin, and took out two others with the strength of his swing. Sir Limley hacked and slashed with his longsword through the crowd, lopping free life and limb. Qwingan had bloodied his new weapon for the first time. A stoatkin came slithering up, reaching out with a rusty pointed dagger. The stoatkin was not quick enough, though, and Qwingan swung his flail in time to knock the stoatkin to the ground, ending its attack. Qwingan looked around for anyone he knew. The king, Dolben, Limley, but they were all swallowed up in the battle. Chapter 8. The battle is done, the thorn has stung. The clashing of swords against metal rang throughout the forest for 2 hours when the first cries of retreat came from the leaders of Rot. King Samuel had forced Darkoak Brier back, and the rest of his kin were not able to fend off the king's army.
You slimy bastard. This is not the end of this. I shall return with more fury than the first time. The rot will consume you all,
screamed the black squirrelkin as he and all his kin retreated into the depths of the thorns. Qwingan had only then realized the places on his legs where the thorns had pierced him. He was bruised and battered and all around tired, but still alive. His eyes searched the battlefield, moving from fallen soldier to fallen soldier until his eyes found the king. Despite being splotched with blood, the king was fine and calling all his captains to him. Qwingan continued his search. Many Fyelings that he had seen inside the stronghold were now dead in the thorns. Finally his eyes rest upon the body of Dolben. Quickly he ran over, ignoring the pains of the thorns, and fell to the side of Dolben. "Dolben!" he cried. "Don't tell me you are finished."
"Raise your voice, lad,"
the fallen Fyeling's voice croaked hoarsely.
"I am not finished yet." Ugh.
Qwingan squeaked in relief.
"Oh, thank Yimsalfa! I feared you had fallen."
Qwingan helped the rabbitkin to his feet. Once he was standing, he lurched forward, clutching a spotch of red appearing under his tunic.
"Damned mangy one got me a bit. Not enough to kill me over, though."
Qwingan helped Dolben to the king, now surrounded by all of his remaining captains. "My kin, we have survived this assault, but the time will come for us to take arms again. Get the wounded back to safety, and help to fortify the stronghold. We will be ready next time." And so the Fyelings all returned to the stronghold, some carrying the wounded and some carrying the dead, but none in the service to the king were left to the thorns. The northern territories of the Fyelings retreated to the capital as King Samuel had commanded, and many more patrols were stationed along the northern territories in preparation for the next attack. Thank you for listening to Northern Rot, written and recorded by Spife in the year 2023.